Warning, we're not your attorneys. Please don't take anything we say as legal advice. I'm Geoff.
I'm Mike.
And I'm Derrick.
And you're listening to the Not So Grand Jury,
which is now sponsored by Morwa P. LLC.
We would normally put a plot summary here, but it's Jaws. Come on. If you haven't seen this movie, I don't know what you're doing. So yes, the Jaws, not what one would think of immediately when talking about a legal podcast dealing with pop culture. However, there are a number of issues that the film raises if you scratch under the surface a little bit. A big one being that Mrs. Kittner's son, Alex Kittner, is killed on the beach after the government in Amity is aware that there is a shark on along the shore of their island. Another being the award that Mrs. Kittner puts out for anyone who kills the shark that ate her son. I'm saying too much. There's also
you were saying the exact amount of times you should say for the record.
Yeah. Not to mention that Robert Shaw's character Quint destroys some vital parts of his boat. There's also discussion of whether or not this should be a Coast Guard matter. All of these are potential legal issues, and we want to talk about them a little bit. So I'll go ahead and start with Mrs. Kittner, because I think that's one of the more interesting things that a lot of people don't know about. And that is the government doesn't have any obligation to protect you, to take affirmative action to protect you from other people, from nature, what have you.
I just found out that a girl got killed here last week. And you knew it. You knew there was a shark out there. You knew it was dangerous, but you let people go swimming anyway. You knew all those things. But still, my boy is dead now.
Except where you are in the government's custody. There are a few cases that touch on this subject. All of them, like universally, these are cases that require a trigger warning. They are tragic cases that make you mad at the police for the most part, or prison officials, sometimes school officials. But I'm going to highlight two of the cases here, both from after. Virtually all these cases are after Jaws came out, but they're not creating any new rights, as we'll talk about. The state of the law afterward is pretty much what existed in Jaws. So not a huge problem that these cases were later. The first is DeShaney v. Winnebago County. This is from 1989. And like I said, each of these is going to require a bit of a trigger warning. They both involve violence toward children, so just bear that in mind. This case involved a 4-year-old boy whose father beat him regularly and so severely that he was basically had severe permanent brain damage. And much of this happened while he was under the supervision, essentially, of Child Protective Services. And Child Protective Services documented much of the abuse that happened, but never stepped in to remove him from his father's custody. And in fact, at one point, returned him to his father's custody. After the boy suffered the most serious of the injuries, and was rendered, permanently brain damaged, his mother filed suit on his behalf, and essentially saying that the government, by Child Protective Services, by letting him stay in his father's custody, had violated his due process rights, his rights to life, liberty, property, those kinds of things. This is an aspect of the due process clause called substantive due process rights. And in the case, the Supreme Court concluded that the government, like I said, has no affirmative duty to act where the government did not themselves have custody of the person or essentially place them in a position where they would be harmed. In fact, I think even stating it that is stating the government's obligation too broadly.
I mean, let me ask you a question, Geoff. Like, and you might not know the case perfectly, but like, Child Protective Services actively knew that the dad was beating him.
Essentially, yes. They suspected to the point of they knew.
Okay. Because I mean, I could see them making an argument that like we weren't 100% sure, blah blah blah. But like, I guess I'm going to make a guess that the fact that it got to the Supreme Court indicates the assumption was they knew. Did they have an affirmative duty? Right. Effectively.
Right.
Yeah.
And essentially, what the court said is that due process protects you. Like I said, when you are involuntarily committed to a mental health facility run by the government, or when you're involuntarily committed by the government to a mental health facility, when you are an incarcerated individual, it may apply in schools under the right circumstances. But outside those custodial situations, the government has no more duty to intervene to protect you than any other person on the street has a duty to protect you from the actions of other people. And that if the government acts negligently or, willfully disregarding someone's well-being, then that's something that has to be pursued under state tort law, which adds another whole wrinkle to this because states under the 11th Amendment are given sovereign immunity. You cannot sue the state for virtually anything unless the state has expressly said that you can, and that's usually done in the form of a tort claims act. I went and looked at Massachusetts's tort claims act. Let me try that again. I went and looked at Massachusetts Tort Claims Act, which incidentally was passed in 1978, 3 years after Jaws came out. I don't know if Mike is frozen with that look on his face.
Oh no, sorry. I was reading something as we're doing this.
He's just so excited and enamored with what you're talking about.
I don't know how to comment
so
on
shocked
this.
and interested.
I don't want to be like, how do you react to child abuse?
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And I'm going to get to that in a second. Like why is the law on this the way it is? I just want to mention that, and we may have to have a debate in this episode over whether or not we're using like New York law or Massachusetts law, because the book is expressly set off the coast of Long Island.
Yeah, but we're doing the movie.
The movie
takes place
right
in Amity, so it's
to clarify, Amity Island in the book is off of Long Island.
Oh.
It is filmed in Martha's Vineyard, obviously. They don't say in the movie where Amity is. They don't mention anything. So
I thought it was implied that it was in Martha's Vineyard.
I take it as
Amity.
implied by the movie because of the discussion of what the regional accent is between Sheriff Brody and his wife at the beginning of the movie. That they are on an island essentially near Boston. Now, I'm not too familiar with the Long Island accent, but it doesn't. My recollection of the Long Island accent is fairly distinct from a Boston accent.
There's also Massachusetts plates on some of the cars.
Well, yeah, because you're in Martha's Vineyard. Yes, obviously.
Because they are filming in Martha's Vineyard.
But like the set piece cars, like the Brody's awesome Chevy Blazer. This is such a cool car, by the way.
It is a very cool car.
Yeah.
There is an argument it could be in both. I looked up both New York and Maryland whenever I did research into this, but in the end, I don't think they actually vary very much in the grains, like for purposes of what we're talking about.
Yeah, they're not going to vary too much. I just want to mention a couple of specifics with regard to Massachusetts. Even once its Tort Claims Act was passed in 1978, it capped the damages even for the death of a person well, it currently caps the available damages at $100,000. That's in today money. I don't know what it would have been in 1978 money, what the statute said in 1978. I didn't have the original language of the statute available to me at the time. But I have, in my head, I may not have said it explicitly, moved on to the statute that might have applied around the time that Jaws came out.
So I see what you're saying. So if there was a case where the state is responsible for, a child's death in some capacity, at most, right, even if they are found responsible, it's $100K capped.
Correct. Yeah.
Got it.
So Mrs. Kittner, for the death of her son under the Massachusetts statute, could have received at most $100,000 if it had happened today. There's another case from 2007, which again has some tragic facts. Town of Castle Rock v. Gonzalez, where a father who was subject to a restraining order kidnapped and then killed his children and himself. When he kidnapped the children, his wife or his ex-wife went to police, provided the restraining order, which had language that said that they shall take action to enforce the restraining order when they have probable cause to make an arrest. They shall enforce the restraining order by making an arrest when they have probable cause to do so. Nevertheless, law enforcement took no action. It was only some hours later that he ended up doing this murder-suicide. And the Supreme Court said, again, that the government doesn't have an affirmative duty to step in to protect you, even when the restraining order directs law enforcement that they shall do something. They do not have a requirement to do so, which may not be significant to people listening, but is going to be really significant, I think, to Derrick and Mike and any other lawyers listening, because the word shall is perhaps the most emphatic word in a statute that says behavior is mandatory. However, the courts have said that in the context of law enforcement, when a statute directs that law enforcement shall do something, it's essentially a suggestion.
So let's talk about that.
Sure.
And not spend an hour on it. Is it have something to do with the qualified immunity situation, or do you remember why they came to that conclusion? Other than I'm just super curious as to how they got there. Yes, please take a sip of whiskey before you answer that question, because I'm sure it's going to make you very happy.
Yeah. So this gets to the justifications they pointed to for these rules. One being that police and prosecutors have prosecutorial discretion. Police can decide whether or not to enforce a statute against someone. You're not going to cite everyone for jaywalking. If such a requirement existed, law enforcement resources would essentially be taxed to the extent that it would cease to function. Some might see that as a good thing. I'll leave that for another day.
But I'll let you finish, and then I have a question, but keep going. Sure.
The other aspect of this is that when we're talking here about the due process clause is like much of the Constitution. In fact, all but a handful of provisions in the Constitution are limitations on government actions. And the due process clause limits what actions the government can take toward a person. It does not impose affirmative duties on the government to take affirmative action. And they point out that in a case like this, where you have a father and the various parental rights that go into a parent's relationship with their child, that if the government took action too soon, and where the balance is between two, obviously we know when it's too late, but in this instance, but finding a balance between too soon and the right time to take that affirmative action could mean infringing on the father's rights if he has not, taken any negative action toward the children yet, or, any parent placed in a position where the government thinks they might harm their children. the parents have rights as well. There's a whole long conversation about parental rights versus the rights of children and the protection of society that we could get into. I've written a memo and an amicus brief on this question in the recent past. But we're not going to get into that today because I've already talked.
I was going to say, you always do a lot of research for the show, but you seem particularly good at explaining that in a way. Like, I had not heard that explanation before. I like that.
Yeah, as if you spent more than just this episode preparing for it, weirdly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, chapeau.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wait till we talk about like religious entities in a movie in the future. Then we're gonna have some fun.
Oh, I thought about Wicker Man as a movie. Just a religious town.
Make a note of that for later.
Yeah.
That would be one of those things where we would just go, all right, folks, strap in, Geoff, go.
Now, which one do we do? Do we do the original or do we do...
Oh, let's leave this conversation for later.
Okay.
Mike's already bored with Jaws, and we're only...
Oh, no, I'm in for any
22
movie
minutes
where the
into
little
Jaws.
town has lots of weird things going on.
Well, and I guess, getting back to your point, Geoff, I would actually argue that the restraining order is kind of written like crap. To say that they shall enforce it, it's actually a very hard thing to tell the police, right? Like, that's actually very interesting. How are you forced to enforce restraining order?
Who drafted the restraining order?
So the restraining order, that aspect of the restraining order, it's my understanding that aspect of the restraining order was sort of boilerplate language on the restraining order form.
That's terrible then. That means somebody actually reviewed that at one point.
Yeah. So all of the upshot of all of this is that Miss Kintner, especially in 1975, was shit out of luck. The best she could do was slap Brody for allowing people to be on the beach. A little while later, there might have been a remedy in civil court for up to $100,000. I presume she might have gotten it. In particular, if she found out that they had, doctored public documents to change it from being a shark attack to it being a boating accident.
Well, what else could have done that to that girl? Boat propellant?
Well, I think possibly, yes, a boating accident.
That's not what you told me over the phone.
I was wrong. We'll have to amend our reports.
And you'll stand by that?
I'll stand by you.
Something that we're not going to have time to dive into here because I've gone on for too long already. But don't expect the government to take affirmative action to protect your interests unless you are already in their custody, essentially.
Hi everyone, Derrick here with a brief message. The Not So Grand Jury is sponsored by my law firm, Moore Law PLLC. One of Moore Law PLLC's many practice areas is business law. If you are a business owner or someone who is thinking of starting up a new or side business, you need a legal team who can efficiently provide you legal counsel, keeping you and your business away from potential legal issues, and if necessary, representing you in any disputes that do arise. We pride ourselves on being cost efficient while also getting to know our clients. If you want less stress and more support, you need Moore Law. If you would like to set up a free consult, please click on the link in the show notes, visit our website, www.mooreatty.com, that's mooreatty.com, or email us at contact@mooreatty.com. And now, back to the show.
I'm going to pass things off to Derrick to talk about boats and laws relating to boats. And I think first, Derrick, do you want to give us a brief understanding of your particular interest in this issue, why you wanted to tackle this?
Well, yeah, I'm not sure if "want's" the right word, but was willing to. And it's partially because of a case I had at not that long ago. It was at my last firm that involved boating out on Long Island. It was actually, and for you lawyers out there, you will wonder if this actually is a real thing. It involved an easement. I actually litigated an easement case. So for those of you who went to law school, heard about the word easement and said, I'll never see this again. Yeah, I thought the same thing. It is actually a thing that occasionally gets litigated. So I litigated a case regarding whether an easement had been abandoned or not.
Was this an easement in the middle of the ocean, or?
I was going to say an easement on the water or on a boat.
So it was actually an easement regarding access to
that makes sense.
a dock.
Okay.
So there are as you can imagine, especially out Long Island's a good example of it, where there are a lot of, houses right on the water, but there are substantially more docks than houses because the
Give a brief description of an easement.
Sure. Well, I'll do it, and then you guys can tell me if I'm completely effing this up. But effectively, easement is a right that one property owner gives to another to cross over their land or enter the land, but without possessing it, effectively. So you are giving someone the right to cross over your property for a variety of reasons, whether it's to have a driveway for egress and ingress, whether it is to get somewhere, whether it is because you don't have any ability to leave your land, so that's just how you do it. Like, easements allow someone the ability to cross over a property, but not actually have any ownership rights over it. And it's typically included in a deed so that it's passed along from owner to owner over the years.
Yeah, the only note I might add is you said one property owner gives to another property owner. I don't know if the other party has to be a property owner.
Fair enough. It could be to literally anyone else for a specified purpose. And in fact, I think some easements can be for the general public, right? Like, yeah, there could be like a path.
Could be, I give to Derrick Moore and all his descendants the right to cross over this,
That's true.
My property or something.
Yeah, you're right. It doesn't necessarily have to be one property owner or another, but it's one property owner gives the right to some other person or individual or a broader public the ability to use their land for a specified purpose. So in the case I had, our client was a property owner on the water, and a different property owner across the street had a dock that was off of her property, but they had to use her property to get there. What actually happened was the dock was destroyed during one of the hurricanes in New York, and effectively the argument was the easement had been abandoned because they could no longer use the dock. So we actually, as part of the argument we actually made arguments that they couldn't access the dock anymore, they couldn't build off of the dock. We talked about how, like, certain boats couldn't dock even if they were able to, that they couldn't dock there, things like that. So I had spent some time dealing with boats, marine life, a few other things out in good old Long Island.
Quick question. Would your arguments have been different if, rather than a hurricane, the dock had been destroyed by, for example, two drunk guys attaching a pot roast to a hook and throwing it off the end of the dock, only to have it taken by a shark?
So here's the fun part.
Behind that are incredible.
Here's the funny thing. No, it would have been the same. I would have literally made the same arguments because, so here were the arguments. The arguments was that they couldn't rebuild. That was the main argument we made because the regulations had changed since the dock was made. So our argument was where their dock is based on the environmental situations on the water, they can't rebuild, was our argument.
I feel like I would argue how much time had passed.
Not enough time for abandonment, but we argued abandonment. So here we are.
I think I would have argued impossibilities.
So here's the problem. And I'm doing this off of memory. This was now 5+ years ago.
I'm criticizing you for a case that I've never seen before. So
correct.
What the fuck do I know?
But as I recall, the arguments in New York on abandonment and impossibility are darn similar, and they almost get synonymous with the same. So for purposes of property, an impossibility argument is basically an abandonment argument, as I recall.
Makes sense.
And I will say, I'm going to give you a very brief story about my lawyering life when it came to this case, which was we were supposed to go to trial on this case. Both the lawyers showed up for trial, and the judge was basically like, I'm not having a trial for this case. The two of you go into a room, spend 2 hours, hit up the facts. If you can't settle it, you will write a joint statement of facts that you agree upon, and we will do a legal briefing on who wins or not. He refused to let us actually have a trial.
I like that. I think that's funny.
So the opposing counsel and I literally went into the room and sat there and typed up a 8-page statement of facts, and only disagreed on 3 or 4 things. And the things we disagreed on, we just sort of found a way to write it that we could still do the legal briefing. But just a kind of hilarious thing where sometimes judges don't want to deal with you, and they will find a way to make them not have to spend hours with you in a courtroom. Yeah. But yeah, that's so. I had a little. So based on that, I had a little bit of random experience with waters and fishing and marine life and other things. So I felt like I could take on some boating regulations and Coast Guard stuff. So here we are. Let me get into it. So the things I wanted to talk about were basically anything revolving like the boats in Jaws. There was one point where the marine is he a marine biologist? Is that what his freaking job title was?
Yeah, something similar to that, yeah.
Yeah. So that would be Hooper, right? Matt Hooper. So yep. Hooper basically says, "Did you call the Coast Guard at some point, or did you notify the Coast Guard about this?"
This was no boat accident. Did you notify the Coast Guard about this?
No, it was only local jurisdiction.
And this was when he discovers they should have known it was a shark attack. They lied that it was an accident, so on and so forth. Which, by the way, led me down a pretty big rabbit hole. Because the Coast Guard does a lot. Like, even though they are responsible for the coast, duh, that's what they do. But the purpose of the Coast Guard actually, to this currently, has 11 different missions. 5 are Homeland Security related, 6 are non-Homeland Security related, and I did not look into the Homeland Security part because
we're talking about sharks.
The shark wasn't Homeland Security related. Also, Homeland Security wasn't actually a thing until right after 9/11. So the 6 things
did
that are
9/11,
not
Derek. The shark did 9/11.
Oh my god! It was 75.
Shark at Alabama.
Oh, well, let's talk about that. Anyway, so the non-Homeland Security missions of the Coast Guard include marine safety, search and rescue, aids to navigation, living marine resources, marine environmental protection, and ice operations. Those are all the things that the Coast Guard does. Now, what's interesting about it is the Coast Guard mostly focuses, as you can imagine, on boats. So a lot of what their advice is, and there's also a thing called the Coast Guard Auxiliary, which focuses on sort of boat safety. They're the ones that do the boat safety requirements. You get a license through them, so on and so forth. I looked it up, and when Jaws was made, the Coast Guard actually had a much limited jurisdiction than it currently does, because up until 1976, the area that the Coast Guard patrolled was only 12 miles offshore. It wasn't until 1976 that was extended to 200 miles offshore, which is slightly different. And I think the reason that happened was because yes, Geoff, that was bigger. Very good. Your mathing is remarkable right now.
I math.
I math. I lawyer, I math. I assume, and I have not done any research on this, but I assume it was because people were just going 13 miles offshore doing illegal crap and coming back in, and they couldn't do anything about it because we all know international waters is a little bit of a wild, wild west when it comes to what you can and can't do.
So I think there's actually a different explanation. It's going to take me a second to get the exact dates on this, but at a certain point, national borders extended like only 12 miles off the shore, and then it was expanded to 200 miles, which meant that like some small island nation suddenly had massive borders.
So you're talking about the exclusive economic zone stuff? Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm trying to remember whether or not that had something to do with what the U.S. did. I thought that was actually a different time period. But anyway, regardless, for purposes of the Jaws, at the time, up until a year later, the Coast Guard had a limited jurisdiction. So from what I can tell, should they have called the Coast Guard? Probably. Is there a requirement to? Doesn't appear so. However, if they had radioed into anybody, so if there was a radio, like if someone radioed in about a shark attack, it is highly likely the Coast Guard got it because everyone was on radio frequencies, right? So if any boat on their frequency mentioned a shark attack, if it was on the police or whatever, it is highly likely a Coast Guard would have been involved.
So once there's So once there's those patrol boats in the along the beach, once there's that helicopter overhead, the Coast Guard is at least aware something is going.
Like, I would be mildly shocked if the Coast Guard wasn't aware when they found out there was 1 billion boats in Amity. Like, they at some point they have to be like, what is going on? And like, you can't tell. And like, by the way, the Coast Guard has pretty broad jurisdiction. Like, when it comes to boats, they can board a boat, they can seize a boat, they can do whatever the heck they want without any like true requirements.
Also, just jumping back, it was 1982 that the UN Convention of the Sea extended it to 200 miles. Before that, it would have been 12 miles.
Yeah, so I think, so the U.S. kind of did it separately. And again, that may have just been the thing that the world was working towards and just never got there. Yeah.
Something just percolated from my memory. And I haven't looked into this. I hope it's accurate and not just, an old wives' tale or what have you. But do either of you recall why why national waters before 1982 extended only 12 miles?
Nope.
Because that was how far cannons could reach from the shore. So that was how far state authority could extend into the ocean from it.
You know what? That's a better rationale than I was expecting. It's like a more logical goal.
I might be wrong. Listeners, if you want to correct me, feel free. That's just something that's
better than.
I want every listener to correct you. I want all listeners to look this up and send them in. Please send it to our email. Please send it, and we'll link right now to what our email is, what our socials are right now, because I want everyone to mention what Geoff is wrong about. And I hope he's right. But who the heck knows?
I just find that fascinating, and I hope I'm right too. But
yeah, of course. I mean, and by the way, that makes perfect sense. That makes perfect sense in some weird way. I have no idea if it's true or not, but it makes perfect sense in my brain. So by the way, so for me to sort of figure out whether or not the Coast Guard would have been involved, it got me to find out that I did not know that the Jersey Shore shark attacks of 1916 were partially the inspiration for Jaws. I'm not sure if you guys...
Oh, yeah, the bull shark?
Well, that's a question, whether it was a bull shark or whether it was a huge shark, because they never actually confirmed. They found a big shark that had human remains in it. They weren't sure if it was the same shark that killed a couple people. But
okay,
so
I thought it was a bull shark, is what they identified it as.
So for those of you who are not aware of the inspiration of Jaws, in 1916 there were multiple shark attacks on the Jersey Shore. As I recall, there was like an 11-year-old, a 24-year-old, and I think a 14-year-old were all sort of either killed or severely injured over the course of a few days. And I've looked in Business Insider. We all know Business Insider knows their stuff. I'm going to read a quote there, which was, in 1916, when they were trying to, find the shark, it goes, meanwhile, New Jersey fishermen, Coast Guard members, and townspeople threw sticks of dynamite into Matawan Creek and used wire nets to try to capture the offending animal. So in 1916, they thought that was the best plan. And apparently that's what Jaws thought in 1975 was, let's throw sticks of dynamite into the water and see what happens, including the Coast Guard. So the Coast Guard decided that was actually the best play. That's an interesting move. I would like to think the Coast Guard has gotten more sophisticated over the years, but
nope.
But I think they have. I think they do a pretty good job.
Probably, yeah.
But anyway, so to answer the question of did you notify the Coast Guard about this, they probably should have, and in fact, the Coast Guard probably would have found out about it relatively soon if they were at all monitoring radio traffic, boat traffic, anything else. Whether they needed to is actually another question, because Coast Guards aren't like active in shark attacks. I mean, they do help out people who are stranded, and there are videos and stories of Coast Guard saving people from sharks, but it's mostly because their boat became inoperational and they're trying to do a rescue and they're in shark infested waters, things like that. So that for that answer. As to, the fishermen who were throwing dynamite in the water, that seems very illegal, and I looked it up, and in fact it is illegal. The only story I have is from 50 years before that, where they were chucking it into the water in hopes to kill a random shark. I don't know if that had any impact on whether it was illegal or not, but I'm going to guess it maybe did. The radio is interesting. I looked up. I could not find anything that required a boat the size of the Orca to actually have a radio.
Like, I found that there are some regulations that say, like, if you have I think it's a 66-foot boat or something, or bigger than that, you need to have a certain radio. The Orca was about 42, based on what I looked up. So it's not clear whether they needed a radio. I'd like to think you would like to have a radio in case you are, hypothetically, your boat is half eaten by a shark, but more importantly, if your engine dies or anything. Now, I will say it was hard to look this up because so many people, like, they talk about cell phones now and they just say, use your cell phone to do whatever. But obviously, if you go too far outland, the cell phone doesn't do shit anymore. So, there's a, so everything I read sort of indicates that, like, Quint destroying his radio may in of itself not have been illegal. It was dumb, but it may not have been illegal. So that's sort of what I have. So, like, and listen, it's actually a little unclear back in 1975 what kind of licenses they had to have boats. Like, when all those people come in that one day to, like, get ready to go catch the shark, and it just seems like complete nonsense. It's hard to know whether that's true or not. What I would be very curious about is if they all come in, all the radios start exploding. I'm curious what the Coast Guard would do nowadays. Like, would the Coast Guard just come in and be like, what is going on? All of you come back in. This is not a thing anymore. Like, I'd be kind of curious. It's hard to know, like, 75. It's 50 years ago. I don't know if the Coast Guard had that kind of ability to sort of swoop in and say, no, you're not doing this. Like, honestly, it's kind of interesting. So I was actually expecting to see that everything was illegal. It was all ridiculous. What the hell are you doing? It's not as bad as I thought it was, which is kind of interesting.
Interesting. And you mentioned a few times an influx of boats to Amity Island. And I think Mike might be able to talk to us about why there was that influx of boats to Amity Island. That seems like a good segue.
Man, every segue is good until you compliment the segue. Then it's just a segue then.
All right. Well, Colleen, if you'd like to cut me explaining the segue.
No. You can cut it. I don't care.
Colleen, you can either cut the explanation of the segue or keep the whole thing in so it all sounds great. Okay, keep going.
So, faced with this killer shark, what do the officials at Amity decide to do after they finally acknowledge that it is a shark? They decide to incentivize people to go out and kill it with a unilateral contract. They offer originally $3,000 to anyone who can bring in the shark.
Any special questions?
Is that $3,000 bounty on the shark in cash or check?
I don't think that's funny at all. I'm sorry.
All right. That's private business between you fishermen and Mrs. Kentner.
So what's a unilateral contract?
Mike, I just want to jump in. You might want to say that one more time, but it wasn't Amity's officials. It was Mrs. Kentner.
Oh, it was Mrs. Kentner. Sorry. I apologize. So to help get rid of the shark and to incentivize whoever was getting rid of it, Mrs. Kentner offered a unilateral contract. And what is a unilateral contract? Or what is any contract really? Like, how is something like this enforceable? How do you know you're going to get paid? Well, there's contract law, and this is actually how Geoff and I met. We were in contracts together, one year of law school. A contract.
I didn't even know that. That's actually very exciting.
Yep. It's adorable, right? We're supposed to get lunch with our contracts professor sometime soon. So
interesting. The things I learned.
So to simplify an entire semester of law school into like a couple sentences, but what is a contract? So a contract is a meeting of the minds between two individuals. There has to be an offer, so some kind of description of what is being offered, some kind of acceptance, consideration of what is being offered and accepted. There has to be a meeting of the minds between the two, not to overuse that phrase, and then performance and a few other requirements following that. For a unilateral contract, how is it possible to, and I guess to run that back, like if you're at a store and they're offering to sell you lemonade, that's their offer, and you give them money, that's the consideration, and then you get the lemonade in return. very quick little contract. In this situation, Mrs. Kittner is offering $3,000 to anyone who can kill the shark. For one, how is a one-sided contract a binding contract?
How do you have a meeting of the minds? How do you? Yeah.
So there are some limitations on this. I should probably pull up my notes more. So there's an older rule about this that a unilateral contract is revocable anytime before it's been before the designated act is completed upon. There's a more modern rule that anytime performance has begun, it's accepted, and you can see how that might be in effect here, where Mrs. Kinder's offering $3,000. Everyone runs out to shore to go kill the shark. She immediately shouts afterwards, "I revoke that offer!" But they come back after killing all the sharks in the ocean and want their money. Who would get paid there?
Actually, what's
classic rule? Sorry, go on.
Let me ask that question. Is what is considered starting performance? Is it just you having a boat?
Yes.
Or is it you actually going out that day?
Without any case law in front of me, I would assume any actual step towards it that is beyond what you were doing already.
Interesting.
I would say.
Okay.
I without the case law in front of me, I'd say getting on the boat with intending to kill some sharks and maybe making a big show of it like everyone was doing. Throwing the hook off the side of the dock. That's
with a pot roast?
actual act.
That makes sense to me, which is why I think that must not be right.
So this was always my understanding of contract law, is that of all the areas of law, of all the areas in law school, this is the one that I could go with my gut the most and be most confident in, with the exception of a couple weird areas where you just had to know the rule. And now maybe the better question is, what is her actually revoking it? If she whispers under her breath, "I revoke this," and no one can hear it, is that her revoking it?
Right. Is that her revoking the offer?
Yeah. If she thinks it really loud, is that her revoking it? No. If she paints it on the side of the building after everyone has left to go catch the shark, is that her revoking it? I'd actually still say no, because she knew that the people performing on it couldn't see it.
And once they've left to go find it, it would be kind of fundamentally unjust for her to be able to say get on the radio and go, "Never mind."
Do you remember this?
Come on back.
Do you remember this day in law school? Because I vaguely do. With Highland going over, you used to be able to offer whoever gets me a coconut from the top of that tree gets $1, and then as they're climbing up about to touch the coconut, you say, "I revoke," and they can't collect from you.
Interesting.
So I think you would have to be within range to tell the person, and maybe if there were a law saying that they all had to have radios and you announced over the radio, maybe that would be enough.
Well, what I do like is the fact that Geoff thought like a lawyer and said the phrase "fundamentally unfair." It's just that is an argument you would make on behalf of your client who was just about ready to kill the shark, and then they revoked, and you're like, "It's fundamentally unfair, Your Honor." How is that fair?
You spent all this gas, all this equipment.
Yeah,
you've got 3 barrels in him, for God's sake.
Yeah.
You have 3 barrels in him, half of a boat.
So, and this is now, I guess, going a couple levels deeper. So the offer has to be a concrete offer. It can't just be a hypothetical. Whoever gets me the deadliest shark in the world, whoever kills the deadliest shark in the world gets a $3,000. It's hard to define that. It has to be definite, and it's supposed to not be open to negotiations. But then Quint demands $10,000 for it, which is him making a counteroffer, I suppose.
Yeah, I guess, and he demands that from the city, saying, "Pay me 10."
Yeah. Yep.
I value my neck a lot more than $3,000, Chief. I'll find him for 3, but I'll catch him and kill him for 10. And you gotta make up your minds. You wanna stay alive and ante up? You wanna play it cheap? Be on welfare the whole winter. I don't want no volunteers. I don't want no mates. There's too many captains on this island. $10,000 for me by myself. For that you get the head, the tail, the whole damn thing.
Thank you very much, Mr. Quint. We'll take it under advisement.
And they eventually agree to it. I guess I have two questions for you, and one of these is based on a meme that I found on Reddit. But so Quint demands $10,000. Quint dies during performing on this contract. Who gets the $10,000?
I would think Quint's estate gets 10 grand.
Probably, right?
But I'd also say I think Brody, by killing the shark,
but he's also a city
if
employee.
If he can prove it, gets the 3,000 from Miss Kittner.
Ooh.
I feel like a city employee performing their duties.
But he's not.
This isn't the lottery.
By the way, there's
actually, I'm making that argument. I'm disagreeing with that as I'm making it. I think you're probably right. He probably gets.
There's no way that what he's doing is part of his duties at all.
Fair point. Yeah.
Yes, well outside his station.
Why is he going fishing on the job? Well, he should be fired for this.
By the way, do we know how many miles they go offshore? Are they even in the zone at that point?
I don't know, but they swim home, so it must be pretty close.
We know they're far enough away that they can't see land. But that only requires going about, I think, and it's been a while, but I think about 4 miles. So it's tough to say, but more than a few miles offshore.
My very quick Googling indicates that it's about 3 miles away. You can't see the horizon. So
okay.
The horizon. So okay.
So they might have survived. They might have swum home and survived.
Yeah, it's actually unclear.
But there's no other sharks.
They've got the barrels on one. Despite all the blood in the water, there are no other sharks around.
Yeah, they got all the other sharks. That raises my second question: does Mrs. Kittner have to pay the guys who got the bull shark?
No, they didn't perform the contract.
I mean, does she know that? When was that made public? Did she already pay them?
Well, yeah, we're having to assume
can she get the money back? Can she get the money back?
I mean, here's what I want to know: did they kill the shark? They have it all hoisted up. Did they immediately go to her house and go, "Thank you for the money"?
Money, please. Without any proof. See, it's the fact that they would be demanding it, just having killed a shark with no proof that it was the one that killed their son.
Also, the one part of this movie that I'm like, that's fucking bullshit. When they're like,
tiger shark, this is way outside of its range. It's like, that is not outside of its range. That is a totally normal shark to catch there.
Interesting.
Yeah. Also, if you want to like have a cool little Google search, tiger sharks and the shit that they eat. And they came up in the movie, but it's like at one point a tiger shark was found with a suit of armor in its stomach.
Outstanding.
Car parts are very common. They eat everything.
Listen, here at Not So Grand Jury, we don't just talk about the legal stuff. We talk about the important things.
Shark law.
Shark diets.
And I guess
what shit shark
night law?
Good times.
So that was a brief rundown of contract law.
Yeah, there are a lot of movies where you can do some deep dives into contract law.
Yeah, we'll get more into it. Also, the scene where Quint is getting eaten by the shark is when I looked at my girlfriend and said, "Can you believe that this is rated PG?"
Oh, well, actually, didn't Geoff and I talk about that? It was just because there was no PG-13, right?
Yes. Yeah. There was no PG-13. It was either PG or R. So they toned down the nudity in the beginning of the movie to make it a PG movie.
Right.
Yeah, and by toned down, they turned the brightness down.
Yes,
like
they literally,
if it were today, they literally turned the brightness down on the underwater shot of the woman who gets killed at the beginning, because otherwise he would have gotten R or maybe even an X rating.
Well, and again, like in 1975, at a theater, that had to have been actually intense for people who had never they didn't imagine that, right?
We can go a lot into the background of this movie because there's a lot of background to it, but like that terrifying shark that appears at the end is the only time you get a good look at the shark, and it's because it was the only time it was working during the entire shoot.
Yes, yeah, we all things we find out after the fact. Yeah.
I mean, this was really the first blockbuster ever. I can completely understand why, especially in the 1970s, people are lining up around the block again and again, and there aren't VCRs. You're not going to catch this on HBO, which I think started in like 1981 or something. And I imagine this, even though we look at it now, the special effects are fairly dated, and whatnot, but the response to this has to have been roughly the same as when 2 years later New Hope comes out, and then everyone's minds are blown again. What an interesting time it would have been to see these movies in theaters for the first time. Nothing legal related to that. Just
yeah, that's fair. Well, actually, let's get into it then. What did we think?
I love this movie. Yeah, I mean, who wants to start? Geoff, it's your movie.
I'll start. It's my pick. I'll start. In terms of quality, 9 out of 9 justices. Like I have no. Again, special effects look dated, but what are you going to do? It's a movie from 1975. Yeah. It's fantastic. If you haven't seen Jaws, go watch Jaws. Why have you listened to us talk about this movie without having seen Jaws? In terms of like the law, it's kind of a weird movie to grade in terms of the law. However, I will say, at least with regard to what we've talked about, there's the unilateral contract. There's the government's not going out of its way to protect people at all, which it was within its capacity to do. Quint destroying his radio is apparently perfectly not. I won't say perfectly acceptable, but there's no legal repercussions for that. I mean, to the extent it talks about the law, I'd have to give it to the extent it intersects with the law. It never really talks about the law. And side note, the book that Jaws is based on, yes, Jaws is based on a book, if you weren't aware, it's by Peter Benchley, and it has a little more law in it, because the whole reason that the mayor refuses to take any action with regard to the shark is actually rooted in a bunch of mafia stuff that's going on with properties and things like that involve more legal aspects that we weren't going to go into, because none of us owns a copy of the book Jaws.
Nope. Why when Jaws exists?
Exactly. Interestingly, Peter Benchley does appear in the film as a reporter on the beach. But I'm struggling to come up with a number, because it doesn't characterize the law at all, but none of it is conflicting with the law at the time. So I'm not willing to give it a 9 out of 9, because it's not like it was discussing the law in any real sense. But I'd give it a 7. I'm going to give it a 7 out of 9.
Go for it, Mike.
So again, great movie. I'm not. You can't. It would be weird to ding a movie that's 40 years old for
50
visual effects.
Literally
40 years old.
Almost 50 years old, as bonkers as that is.
Which I don't like being reminded of, because I was born in 1982. I just turned 41.
It's hard to believe anything could be older than Geoff. I understand. It's hard to. So, can't ding a movie for that. I would give this 8.5 justices out of 9. I'll give it 9 out of 9 for quality of the movie. It does. We should maybe have a separate category for movies that are, we're only analyzing the law because it exists in in a somewhat real world where the law is a real thing. But in that case, it doesn't do anything that offends me. It doesn't do anything that I got wrong. The real world could totally play out. I should say, the legal effects of this could totally play out in the real world. Giant shark and man swimming back 3 miles. There are some realistic issues, I guess, but I'll give it a 7 out of 9 judges as well.
Okay. So we have 8.5 and 9. I'm going to give it a 8. Listen, it's a freaking solid movie. We all know it's a solid movie. It is a movie that I probably watch once every couple years, and it doesn't disappoint. I will say, and the only reason why I'm giving it an 8 is that there are certain parts of the movie that move real slow, and it's only because I know what's happening. It's like there's like 5 to 10 minute segments of like, I don't need to hear this. Let's get to the cool part. But that is nitpicking at best. Like it's still a solid movie. It's amazing, and it doesn't matter if you know what's going to happen. It's just fun to watch. I will say, big Richard Dreyfuss fan, just for the record. So like, I just, I love his character, and I do think Mike makes a very interesting point on the legal side. So like, okay, so we have a movie that's not a legal movie, so we're rating the law of a movie that's not legal. Yeah, it doesn't do anything that offends me, but I'm going to actually go more on the realistic side. Is this exactly how it would have played out in real life? And the answer is we don't know, because they don't finish a lot of the legal stuff. Like, we never find out if she got paid. We never find out if the town paid out. We never find out, like, we don't find out if the last two guys survive the frickin' swim back to Amity. Like, we don't find out a lot of things, and...
No, let me just push back real quick, because in the final shot of the movie, we see them basically arriving at the shore.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, I honestly, I kind of forget that. I had already moved on by the time we had gotten to that shot. But yeah, okay, I get that. Okay, so fair enough. We do find out, but that has nothing to do with the law, actually. So I'm going to also give it a 7. So I think we're 7s all the way across. Because, again, it doesn't do anything offensive. I'm actually mildly shocked it gets a couple of the law things right. But I will say the reason it gets them right is that it bases it on real life events. So, like, it based a lot of the stuff that happened on the 1916 shark attacks. And they did some of these things. They put the damn dynamite in the creek. They, so
damn dynamite in a creek.
I love the dynamite in the creek, because that's going to do something.
Anyone fishing with dynamite is like in a special place.
Well, and I will say we didn't get into it during the podcast because it was sort of a tangential thing, but like, there's blast fishing is a thing in the world, and it's not great. Like, it's because this may not shock you. It ruins coasts. It ruins, it just ruins marine life. It ruins, things like that. So even though it's illegal practically everywhere, it's a problem. And I'm going to make an assumption, like, throwing dynamite into the water while you have 9 boats around you is probably not... It's the odds of you blowing up another boat and not the shark is significantly higher. I mean, obviously.
You'd actually be driving the shark away, if anything.
I would assume so. I assume if a shark sees a big boom, they're not going towards it. Just guessing. But what do I know?
I do. So you mentioned, the blast fishing and stuff. There's a couple other things that we didn't really talk about, but do have legal ramifications. I just want to mention them. Brody has the mayor sign an order allowing him to hire Quint. They could have just had, Brody hires Quint, and that's not how that would work. The mayor would, the mayor or the city council would have to do that. And there's something we didn't get into that, to me, is maybe a bit of a gray area. We've already given our grades, but whatever. Brody, in talking with Richard Dreyfuss's character, whose name is Hooper, says he's the chief of police, he can do whatever he wants, and they go and they cut open the shark. Is the chief of police, would he be, I presume he'd be allowed to do that? I don't know.
I think that's
the property of the people of the fishermen.
No, this falls into the category of who's going to arrest the chief of police.
Yeah, good point. There are a few legal aspects that we didn't touch on here, but none of them take away from my 7.
They're boring. Which honestly is what we mostly talk about. But that's not going to change. I'm still at a 7. It's fine. I mean, again, I'm at a 7 because, like, you know, of other reasons. But yeah. No, I think it's... Listen, we all know it's a solid movie. We all know it's great. It wasn't made for the legal aspects, but Lord knows I got entertained.
Which is why I picked it, and I find that I find maybe you don't, but I find listener, I find the legal aspects interesting in terms of what goes unsaid and sort of behind the scenes in the movie. So
love it. The Not So Grand Jury is sponsored by Morwapi LLC.
The opinions expressed in the Not So Grand Jury are those of the hosts themselves and not of their respective employers.
The theme music for the Not So Grand Jury is from Gustav Holst's Jupiter and is in the public domain.
If you want to get in touch with us, if you want to suggest future movies, or even if you want to offer corrections, you can email us at notsograndjury@gmail.com.
The Not So Grand Jury is copyright 2024, all rights reserved.